Hello? Oh, okay. Testing. There you go.
Okay, good evening. At this time, we'd like to call to order the Finance Committee meeting of the City Council of Palo Alto for Tuesday, September 2nd, 2025. Would the clerk please call the roll?
Councilmember Rectal,
Here.
Councilmember Lithcott-Hames,
Here.
Chair Burt.
Here.
Here.
Okay, before proceeding to our two action items tonight, we have an opportunity for members of the public to speak on any item that is not on the agenda but is within the purview of this meeting. Do we have any speakers?
No public comment.
Okay, so we'll move on to our first action item, which is a recommendation to the City Council to adopt voluntary residential electric service time of use rates. And who kicks this off from staff?
I will kick it off
Alan.
with staff. Alan Curatoria, Director of Utilities. I just wanted to confirm that this is a voluntary residential electric time of use rate. So just wanted to highlight that.
I think I included that word.
I'm gonna be redundant in that regard. So we have two presenters here today. We have Lisa Belair. She's our Senior Resource Planner. And then Carla Daly is our Assistant Director of Resources for the Utilities. So I'll pass over to Lisa.
Good evening, council members. I'm delighted to be here to talk about our proposal for voluntary residential time of use rates. And we are bringing this to you together with the unanimous support of the Utilities Advisory Commission. And if we can go to the slides. Okay, so time of use rates are a way of pricing the electricity that varies depending upon the time of day that the electricity is used. And electricity tends to be cheaper during the off-peak times, like the middle of the day when there is solar generation and demand is lower. And this can be a way of encouraging customers to use electricity during cheaper and greener times to save money on their utility bill and use electricity when it is not as carbon intensive. And this type of rate structure can help to reduce demand on the electrical grid during peak times. And as I mentioned, lower electricity bills if customers can shift their usage to off-peak hours. So for example, shifting EV charging to off-peak hours. The graphic on the right just shows you a depiction of our time of use rates. And I'll show you another picture of it and go through it in more detail in a later slide. Next slide, please. So again, this is a voluntary opt-in rate for residential customers who are currently on the E1 rate. Customers will need to have an AMI meter in order to enroll, and this will be available effective January 1st. That's going to allow us sufficient time to implement the rate and begin to communicate out to customers about the rates. This residential time of use rate is going to provide some helpful data on demand and cost that we can use as we regularly update the rate through future rate studies in the future. It's not yet going to be available to net energy metering customers, but as we work through some billing system constraints, we'll be offering the time of use rate to NEM 2 customers. The time of use rates are aligned with the requirements of Proposition 26 and aligned with the cost of electricity, the marginal cost. The proposed rates also align with the cost of electricity at the time that the electricity is used throughout the day. So this is going to provide customers the opportunity for a lower cost and lower carbon intensity way of paying for their electricity. The way that yes, further? Oh, great. Okay, let me know if this is better. So the way that we did this, we've included in your packet as an attachment C, a supplement to the electric cost of service study. So you can read all the details of how we developed the rate. And it's designed to produce the same amount of revenue as the E1 rates, assuming that the customers do not change their behavior. So it's the type of thing where we're going to be returning to it and updating our assumptions over time. Next slide, please. So this slide shows what those time of use rates look like in the winter, which is the months from October through May. And you can see in the horizontal lines, the tier 2 and tier 1 rates. Those are the current E1 rates, the 22.9 cents and 20.5 cents per kilowatt hour. And then behind that on the bars, you can see the off-peak, peak, and super off-peak rates, and those are the time of use rates. So you can see the solar generation hours during the day between 9 a.m. and 3 p.m. That's when we're proposing this super off-peak rate. And we'd be encouraging customers to use electricity during that super off-peak time during solar generation, and they can lower their utility bills that way. The higher peak time occurs between 4 p.m. and 9 p.m., and you can see that in the orange bar. If we can go to the next slide, please. This shows the same pattern, but this is what will apply during the summer months, which we're considering to be June through September. Again, the super off-peak between 9 and 3 p.m. during the solar generation hours, and then the peak rate during 4 p.m. to 9 p.m. And all the rest of the times are off-peak. Next slide, please. Now, on this slide, I'm going to talk a little bit about how we came up with the windows of time that we're using for each of those 3 time of use periods, the peak, off-peak, and super off-peak. These rates are consistent with Prop 26, consistent with the costs, but we did have to make a decision about which times of day those rates would apply. So we looked at 4 things in order to determine those time of use windows. The marginal cost of energy, where we look, typically those higher priced periods occur during that peak time period between 4 and 9. We also looked at the distribution peak, both for the whole distribution system as well as just for residential, and noticed that the peak demand is between 4 p.m. and 9 p.m. So that supports that 4 to 9 p.m. period. And then we also looked at the greenhouse gas intensity, or the carbon intensity of the electricity on the market. And this information really supports that super off-peak because the carbon intensity is lower during the solar generation hours during the day. So that's how we're supporting that 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. super off-peak period. We also looked at best practices in rate making. We wanted to make sure that the peak time period is not so broad. It needs to be just the right duration, shorter in duration, to make sure that customers are able to shift their electrical use outside of that peak time period. Next slide, please. So in terms of our next steps, we are planning to bring the time of use rates, these voluntary rates, to the council in September, including a public hearing. We're also bringing a detailed report on implementation and communication plans to the UAC at the October meeting. And in the meantime, staff is doing a lot of activities to prepare for the time of use launch, including modifying the billing system, developing logistics related to customer enrollment and communication and information tools, developing measures of program success, and being ready to analyze customer changes and usage patterns that may result from this marginal cost profile. We are planning a slow, smooth rollout with an initial testing period with a small group of customers that would be capped at about 10 customers per month, to really make sure that every customer has a positive experience through the program and that we work through any implementation issues. Then we'll be continuing a modulated increase in customer enrollments as we go forward with full rollout by about July of 2026. Next slide, please. So our recommendation is for the Finance Committee to recommend that the City Council adopt a resolution adding this voluntary rate schedule for E1 time of use rates for the residential customers beginning in January 2026. So I'd be happy to try to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you. Do we have any members of the public who wish to comment?
No public comment.
All right, we'll start with any questions and comments. Keith, you want to go first?
Yeah, the time of use, I think, is a really good thing. It matches up our costs with the cost that we're charging. That makes a lot of sense. Also, it gives you incentive to be environmental. You don't want to be burning fossil fuel when you can have sunshine. So I think it makes a lot of sense. I'm a little worried about, the concept of adverse selection when, only sick people buy health insurance. And I'm a little worried that the people who use the peak hours will not switch, and that the people who will switch won't change their behavior. And so we won't be changing our behavior, we'll just be cutting our revenue. Have you thought about that?
We have talked about that conceptually, and I think the way we're thinking about it right now is that we are going to do regular updates to these rates and to the data underlying it. So if we see that happening, we're going to closely look at it, and we would update our revenue estimates every year to account for that.
Okay. So right now, how do we set our rates? We look at a mix because we have various costs depending what time of day we purchase the power, but then we charge just a flat rate. How do we set that? We look at the last year's mix.
Are you asking about how do we set the E1
Yep.
rates currently for
The
tier
current-
1
the
and tier
current-
2?
Yep.
Yeah, so we don't do it based on the time of day. We let me find my notes on that.
I assume you look at the average costs, but that average is weighted by how much we use in the middle of the day and how much we use at night. So
Yeah, so I just wanted to add one more item. So when we look at the time of use rates, it's also based on the market, right? So if we see customers switching over and taking power at a lesser cost, that will reflect on our cost of purchasing power. So we're balancing that out. So that's the value of time of use. So when it's more expensive during those peak hours, when you have those peaker plants that need to come online, the gas-fired generation, those are higher costs associated with that. So if we move people over to send them the right pricing signals of what we're seeing, it really should match pretty closely.
I'm not worried about people moving. I'm worried about the people who aren't moving. If they are really soaking in these high price electricity, but we're just charging the flat fee, we're going to start losing money on those existing customers that are still in the flat fee. That's, I think, a real big risk here. I mean, so my question is suppose you saw that. You saw a whole bunch of people flocking, getting the lower rates, but then you have this chunk of people staying with the flat rate who are using a whole bunch of energy during the peak times. And we're losing money on that because we're buying expensive electricity and selling them at a low price. Yep, please.
So we don't know our behavior patterns, what will happen. We do perhaps have some points of reference from other utilities that have already gone this route. My supposition is that our early adopters, and maybe most of our adopters, will be people who are conscientious rather than conscientious on environmental reasons, and rather than ones who are really economically conscious. We may get a mix of both, but that's my suspicion. So you mentioned that we would have 10 pilot adopters per month. Sounds like for the first 6 months because you're starting in January.
I'm not sure of exactly how many customers. It's going to depend on how the rollout goes and making sure that it's smooth. But yes, we're imagining about 10 customers per month for January, February, March, and then maybe a larger number like 50 per month.
So then in addition to seeing any problems, are you going to monitor their changes in use patterns? as a result of going into
Yes.
this.
Oh,
Okay.
Yep.
So that'll answer
Yeah.
Keith's question.
And 10 families a month, I think that's also, you can't get in too much trouble at that low rate.
That's kind of a small sampling. I might consider a larger one, but I'm really glad to hear that you'll be able to know the answer to Keith's question based on the sample.
Right. And as we're updating our rates each year, we'll be, as Lisa said, keeping track of any shifts overall of people on time of use rates and taking advantage of the lower cost time periods versus those customers who might still be using a lot of energy and on the, standard rate, let's call it. And, rates adjust over time to account for those changes in usage patterns for the customer class as a whole.
Okay. And so how quickly can we adjust the rates? If we saw this happening, that we're getting these two pools of customers and they have varying different aspects, how quickly can we change that rate? Are we constrained to once a year?
We're not constrained to once a year, but again, I think our expectation is that the number of customers coming on, we're going to throttle them. So we won't have large amounts coming on at once. And even when we open the floodgates, we're really not expecting a huge number of customers to shift right away. I mean, I think this will happen over time. And so that over time gives us the ability to adjust but if we're wrong, we certainly can adjust rates more than once a year. Yes.
Yeah.
Council can adjust rates.
When I saw the packet, I was a little nervous, but I feel a little better now knowing that it's going to be such a slow roll up. Although, that there's a trade-off there. There's a reason we're doing this for environmental reasons, and that slow roll up is impeding that progress. So if things go well, I would like to speed that up.
Yeah, I also might add that part of our communication plan is to explain to customers whether they're on a time of use rate or not, there's a climate benefit to shifting your usage to those high solar generation hours and away from those less desirable climate hours. And so we're hoping that that message will reach folks and that they might make minor changes to account for that.
So I've had AMI now for over a year. Are you collecting that data? Do you have a distribution of how the usage patterns are and how they vary from person to person?
We have some of that information, but not all residential customers have their AMI yet. And so we have had an intern this summer doing some preliminary analysis on the AMI data, but we are not able to comprehensively review all that AMI data yet, but we're working on it and getting our hands around it.
What I would like to see is, is everyone pretty much the same? They have the same usage patterns, or do some people use a whole bunch in the evenings and some people use very little? And if you have this divergent behavior, then you're going to see those people switch and you're going to have these two populations.
That is a great question and something that we would also like to look at once we have that at our fingertips. It's a massive amount of data and we need to put in place some more tools and analytical processes so that we can answer that question. Great question.
And the 10 families a month, you'll have plenty of time to generate those tools, I would think.
Yes.
Okay. And so we're planning to keep the current rates. We're not changing them at all. We're just introducing these new rates.
Yes. Good point. Yes. We're not changing our current E1 rates. Those are in place already and they're recovering the cost of service.
And what's the end goal? Do we see down the road having everyone be time of use? Or
at this time, this is a voluntary rate for those customers who are interested. So it could, we don't have a plan to change that at this point.
Yeah. But you'll play it by ear.
Can I just add that, we do want to provide our customers options. Some customers can and will change their behavior, and they're able to maybe charge their EVs at a more favorable time. Others maybe cannot. So we want to offer our customers alternatives. Again, this is a revenue neutral type of situation. So while there are benefits on the environmental, there is again, it's a cost of what we need to collect the revenues and provide the service. So it's really should be revenue neutral to the customer base, but
Okay.
provides them an option, right, to maybe get off the higher tiers if they have EVs, they electrify their homes, and they want to go to that next level of maybe reducing their carbon intensity.
And does time of use billing, does that make utility level batteries more attractive? But you basically could
Yeah.
arbitrage the price, right? If you can buy it cheaper and store it and then sell it back at a higher price later,
So you're actually projecting one of the items that will be coming from the council soon on a utility scale battery project. When we look at utility scale battery project, that's really looking for resource adequacy and maybe charging batteries in a different location in the state where there's a lot of solar production that may be curtailed, and looking at some ancillary services and other benefits. So we see that more on the side for utility scale in areas where the solar is maybe being curtailed, and that option of interconnection.
But I thought there were some cases where, like on a cool spring day, we generate more electricity with our rooftop solar than we use.
Oh, individually.
The city as a whole.
No, we do. I don't, internally in the city, we do not over generate. It's
I know that.
possible for individual customers to absolutely
Oh,
potentially
yes.
do that.
Oh,
Yeah.
without a doubt.
But not as a city as a whole. In terms of the solar amount of solar in city and the percentage of that self or generation locally within the city, that it does not, negate imports coming into the city.
With our power purchase agreements, we do,
Okay.
but not local generation.
Okay. I thought in the state, there were points on those cool summer days that have long days. They were basically, the wholesale price goes to zero.
Yes, but that's because of utility scale solar,
Okay.
not
Not
residential.
residential. Okay.
Or other distributed, even the commercial distributed.
That is a good distinction. Thank you. Okay. And finally, you mentioned about people having the option of it shifting their time, and that takes technology, and low income people may not have that. So I'm a little nervous that this time of use could really save money for people, but it's going to save money for rich people. And what can we do to allow poor people to also save that money?
So again, we have very low rates here in Palo Alto, roughly half of what PG&E has. And again, the time of use is just trying to reflect our cost of providing that power. So if we have some reductions where in our peaks, right, in terms of that supply, I think it helps all customers as a whole. But realistically, we have low rates for customers that can't change their time, maybe when they cook dinner, or they have certain times that when they're at home, and other customers that maybe have that can use those advanced technologies. They can manage their power separately. Again, the intent is that it's kind of revenue neutral and balances out our supply.
But
and
for
our
example,
supply
I
cost.
have a smart hot water heater, and that's smart enough that it can turn it self off overnight and then turn it back self on once the sun comes up. And that'll save me money, right? If I use water right before I go to bed, it doesn't heat it up. It waits till it has sun and cheaper electricity. And so things like that, I can benefit that. I get lower rates, but poor people, it's harder for them to buy those high tech equipment that does that. So I kind of feel like we're saving the consumer money, we're helping the environment, but yet the poor people aren't as apt to do that.
I'll let Carla talk more about our programs, but we have wonderful programs for low-income customers. We have a lot, frankly, here in Palo Alto that makes it attractive so that there's not a lot of out-of-pocket costs for them in terms of making that switch and working with the property owner and such. So we have a lot of programs here where we save. Also for income qualified customers, we also offer reduced rates. So we have about 25% less for those income qualified customers. So the rates that you see that we're talking about here, folks that are in those lower income brackets actually get a reduced rate from our already low rates that we have.
Okay. And that's it. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the presentation. Always learn something. I'd like to focus in on the 10 families. I'm just struggling with understanding why is the pilot group so small? What does working with such a small number give us?
So we're envisioning that group to be somewhat hand-selected, staff who live in Palo Alto, council members who have AMI that might be interested in being beta testers, so to speak. And so we just want to make sure all the systems are working correctly. And, before we open this up to
Guinea pigs.
yeah, exactly. We need some guinea pigs. This is complicated, and we need to really make sure that all systems are working properly before we really open this up to the rest of the customers.
So I think that what this reveals is I don't really appreciate the extent to which this is complex and challenging on the customer side. Can you break that down? You've also alluded to wanting to have a positive customer experience. So what would a positive customer experience at dealing with these complexities look like?
I think a bill that is correct and being able to look at your customer portal on MyCPOW and have all the data be correct and match what's on your bill. Any changes to the billing system are always more complex than one would think they are. And we just really want to make sure that everything is working properly before we have too many folks calling customer service.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, and maybe Ms. Blair has mentioned this already, is as we go through this process, we want to provide the customers kind of a look back at their previous 12 months to show them what that value would be to move to the time of use rates. That's going to be a manual process right now as we roll this out. So we do want to, talk to the customers and say, okay, if you went to the time of use, this is what the difference would be. And, then they can just look at that potential and also look at modifying, maybe how they use power as well. So we wanted to make sure that we're doing that process. And I think having these initial customers out there and I wouldn't, maybe beta testing is the right word, really gives us ability to make sure that it's rolling out correctly. And then as we scale, we can roll it out to the most of the community.
Thank you. Your presentation and the staff report mentioned the NEM customers and how they can't opt into residential TOU yet due to some vagaries of the billing system. And it just strikes me that these are already a class of users who are doing their part to help generate solar for the community. So I'm wondering how long we think it'll take to work out the billing kinks so that they can be included in this if they choose.
Sure. And I just want to acknowledge that it's a little bit frustrating as well. We would like to have all of our solar customers able to take advantage of this rate right away. The billing system, as I've said, is complex. We're hoping that by July next year that we'll have a plan in place for when we can get those NEM 2 customers eligible to enroll in the program. So I wouldn't say that we'll be ready for them by July, but by July, we'd like to have a timeline in place for them. And I do want to emphasize that NEM 1 customers, because of the way they're set up in the billing system, we do not envision being able to make those customers eligible for time of use rates.
Okay, thank you. You alluded to there being some minor changes that you would suggest that ratepayers could implement in terms of shifting their usage patterns. What are, the 3 or 4 examples you would give households other than charge your EV? Don't drive your EV to work, but leave it at home and charge it.
Right. I mean, obviously EVs are the big one and maybe the easiest, but also just, don't turn your dishwasher on until after the peak period is over. Maybe set your washing machine to start at a time not during the peak periods and those types of changes. I mean, some things are harder to change, like taking a shower and cooking dinner, but some of those other more discretional uses of energy can be shifted a bit.
Yeah. Well, you just gave me 2 great ideas, so thank you. You indicate that the TOU rates are not expected to incentivize customers to change their electric usage patterns anytime soon. That we expect that it's not going to change anything revenue-wise right away. Do I have that right? I find
I think there are maybe two parts to that question. You're talking about our utility revenue?
I feel like the report stated, and this probably reflects my own, lack of familiarity with the concept. I'm trying to understand it, trying to help people who are watching understand it. The new E1 TOU rates are designed to generate the same fiscal 26 revenue as the standard rates, assuming customers do not change their electric usage patterns. Because the number of customers opting into TOU will gradually increase over time, the revenue risk to the electric utility will be minimal as adjustments to the rate will be implemented over time. So in the beginning, it sounds like we're not imagining that much behavior is shifting.
So when we wrote that, it's more of an analytical concept that we were trying to show because in absence of other data, knowing how customers are going to change their behavior, we had to analyze something that we know, which is how much customers are using today. So we designed the time of use rates to be revenue neutral, assuming that there isn't any behavior change. That doesn't mean we're not encouraging customers to change their behavior, but we're projecting that with those behavior changes, with a small number of customers, where we're collecting data on those behavior changes, taking into account adverse selection, other things that we see, then we can make a better projection every year on how much these behavior changes are going to impact revenue.
Do you have any forecasting on that, on over what period of time or what rate of change you would predict customers to be adopting the TOU rates at?
I don't think we're predicting a rate of adoption. As Carla mentioned, we're more going to be capping the rate of adoption at the beginning to modulate that over time. But we do have in the cost of service study some estimates from other utilities of how much the peak has been reduced. And so, like, for example, I think we cite to a study from PG&E where the peak demand is impacted by 3 to 6% from residential customers adopting time of use rates. So we're going to be thinking about that impact to the peak. If we can reduce our peak demand, that can over time reduce some of the utilities and customers' costs and investment that is needed.
Okay, thank you. I noted that the UAC, somebody on the UAC, or maybe a few people on the UAC asked this question of why wouldn't we want to maximize the price differential between super off-peak and peak in order to incentivize people using energy during super off-peak? How did that analysis go, and what are your thoughts on that now?
Right. So when we looked at, there was a question from the UAC about, did we specifically go and try to maximize that differential between the off-peak or super off-peak and the peak? And we did not set out to do that, but we did set out to reflect the marginal costs in each of those time periods and select appropriate time periods. One thing about that is if you want to increase the peak price, you need to make the peak time period less wide so it captures those higher prices from the peak period. If you do that, you also are going to increase the price in the off-peak because some of those higher priced but not quite the peak prices are moving into the off-peak. So you can actually increase those off-peak prices. We didn't set out to optimize that to make it the maximum differential and to that question, but we did reflect the marginal cost in those different time periods. Yes, exactly. You have to draw the line somewhere.
Okay, that's it for me. Thank you.
Thanks. So one, I wanted to just return to this issue of whether we're revenue neutral. As I think I understand what I've heard is that really, because the pilot's small, the impacts will be de minimis. We don't actually think they're revenue neutral, but they'll be inconsequential. because there's just not that many folks. And that we have the thing that Alan pointed out, that is that not only will we have less consumption during those peak periods, but we'll have less commodity purchase of that high marginal cost, and there will be an offset there. So in that sense, it's neutral in the net, as well as being de minimis in its impact at the outset.
Yes, those are great points.
Okay.
Thanks for bringing those up.
All right, good. And then can you remind me on where we stand on the AMI rollout and when we expect that to be complete? The hot seat is right here, Dave.
Hi, good evening, Dave Yen, Utility Strategic Business Manager. So we just recently installed a new base station at City Hall. So we should be able to light up another probably 3,000 meters in the next few months. I think right now, I think we have like 9,000 meters throughout electric, gas, and water, about 5,000 electric and 2,000 each of the other two commodities. So we're hoping to have all electric done by end of this year is what we're targeting, assuming staffing is okay. And then the rest will be done by end of next year.
Okay, well, once we have all electric, that sounds like that'll actually precede our scaling of the program. So that'll be a non-issue, it sounds like. And a couple of things related to the marketing of this. One, I wanted to just hear a little more on what our intentions are, and probably we don't launch the marketing plan really until we start scaling it. But how do we really plan to roll that out? And do we have any intention to link this with the advantages that people would gain if they install smart meters, smart panels, and smart appliances like Keith was talking about? That I know from hearing stories about kind of the Dutch systems where this is routine for people. They just have their appliances work when electricity is cheapest and greenest, and they're already there. But you have to have some kind of a smart system to optimize that. We can do certain things manually, but it's a lot better there. So is there an intention to promote, at least make people aware of what's available in smart appliances and smart panels that would help them optimize their use of this?
Sure, great question. So we're in the process right now of developing that implementation and communication plan. So I think what I would say is if the Finance Committee have thoughts or suggestions, is it okay that they share them during this agenda item? I think so.
Well, there was just one. So that was one right there.
Well, I don't know if you have more.
Okay, good. And we others may have other ones. Good. The mayor's last press conference, he referenced an anticipation of a doubling of our electricity demand over the next decade, which was not what I recall us hearing at Finance Committee or the SCAP Committee. I've been interested in what our projections were on how much more electricity, and therefore what should be our commodity purchase planning based on that growth, and what that would mean in terms of our costs. And that's what I'm leading to. One is that an accurate statement that was made? Because that surprised me, and I don't know if anybody knows the answer to that.
I don't know if I do have the answer to that. When we look at our projections, they do vary depending on the uptake of electrification, and the changes in our customer base. So we have a series of projections that do look at that potential of an increased electric load, and we do need to plan for that as a utility. And as we look at that projection, we also need to see what is the actual potential of these customers growing? Because if you look at some of the developments and growth in the housing and, the big push we are making for electrification, you could see that type of growth. We're a little bit more conservative in that approach. We'd probably do a lesser amount than a pure doubling of it. But we have seen other agencies around us looking at a significant amount of growth, not only in their peak, but long-term energy use.
And that kind of goes to on page 4 of the staff report, we have this nice table 1 that really shows our commodity costs. And when we have a column that's commodity and then distribution, and the distribution, as I recall, on electricity is our local distribution costs, right? Not from the state grid, that the state grid, I forget what nomenclature we use for it, but it's not just the commodity costs, it's getting it to our city border in that commodity. And I think that's important because on gas, I don't know that we treat it the same way, but anyway, I think it's valuable for people to understand that's not the power purchase agreement price, that's the power purchase agreement plus getting it to Palo Alto. But when we look at the price of commodities between the super off-peak, which is when solar's going gangbusters during the day, and the peak, it's a 4x difference. That's really interesting. And the reason I bring it up, it just points to that if we over time have a fairly significant change in time of use, I don't know what percentage change, but some significant change. One, it levels our demand so that we certainly aren't buying that expensive brown power. But also, if we have to increase our overall supply, what will be the price that we pay to increase it on solar plus storage versus the average price of our portfolio? And I'm not looking for an answer now, but it's a question that I've been really wanting to understand throughout the last several years as we've been looking at our electrification program. If over 20 years we double our electricity use, but all the new supply is cheaper than our average of our portfolio, does that mitigate some of the other cost increases? It won't result in a decline in costs because other costs are going up, but at least that pure commodity cost.
Sure. So, we are going to be coming back to the Finance Committee with preliminary rates and projections and more of this discussion around what our portfolio looks like in the future.
Good. I just kind of wanted to get those questions out there, not expecting to have answers here. And lastly, on our infrastructure within the city, everything from pole-mounted transformers to pad ones and our whole substations, we will have an increase in those needs, and we're already going through it on the residential with the grid mod, but all that is sized for the peak use. And so if we shave off peak uses, I'm assuming that we'll also have a favorable impact on our capital investment for having to expand that capacity. Does that seem correct?
Well, I think Ms. Belair kind of mentioned what we saw in PG&E and other areas, that they saw maybe a 3 to 6% reduction in that peak. I will just circle back to the doubling of the load just as a point of clarification. The doubling of the load, we would see more on the residential side because of the electrification of transportation and your air conditioning unit and your hot water heat pump. So yes, I mean, that is something that we're planning for. When we look at the overall projection for all of our customer bases, because most of our loads are commercial, it's not going to be that pure doubling. However, we do build in redundancy into the system as we design it so that we do have flexibility. So you may see capacity of a lot of our facilities that are going much higher, but it gives us additional reliability and resiliency. So I just want to make that clarification.
Yeah, although I'd be interested in what's our band range of, even on the commercial and industrial side, as we electrify them, and we have whatever range of new data centers would come online. We certainly have not been seeing for some time that growth, but I suspect that we're going to enter a period of commercial growth as well because of those two things. They're going to be electrifying, maybe at a slower pace than our residential, and we'll have some number of data centers, in part because we have real competitive rates. Santa Clara seeks that and has a lot more of them, but we already have one that is significant and some smaller ones, I think, that are already happening. And I don't know what our projections are, but it fits into this whole package of projections that I'm trying to struggle with.
Yeah, I think you'll see that as we factor in our load growth projections, but tying it back to the time of use rates, we do offer time of use rates for multiple customer classes. We're really pleased that we're bringing this one for residential. We've had some commercial for some time. Those are always some challenges. But in load growth, I mean, that's something that we are actively looking at. We provide information to the CAISO, and as you are aware, that's how we were looking at our load growth and reliability, and we have that second transmission corridor as well. So we're bringing in more capacity for the city, and we're pleased to bring these TOU rates to the residential to give them some options.
Great. That completes all my questions. Keith, you
I
have
have a quick follow-up with that. Right now, the distribution cost is just flat. And if you have time of use charging, could you actually transform that into higher rates at peak? Because if peak is what's driving you to buy these transformers, would that be an easy way to do demand charge? Is just to hike up that peak rate just a little bit and then reduce the fixed cost for time of use customers?
Feel like I'm hogging the responses, but so the transformer distribution costs, there has to be some inherent flexibility in terms of what we have in terms of our customer base, in terms of how quickly they electrify or not. So when we look at overhead transformers, they come in certain sizes. 50 or 75 is what we're standardizing on. So when we look at those size of those transformers, it's really not that much expensive between the two. It's like a $1,500 differential, and that serves 6 to 8 homes. So when we look at those costs in comparison, it's really a reasonable investment to update those transformers to give us that flexibility as people electrify. We're not seeing that as a potential reduction in terms of the overall costs and impact as we go to time of use rates.
Okay, so you're saying the distribution costs really aren't driven by peak, but it's driven more by number of customers.
It's number and diversity. So we look at our facilities, there's a diversity factor there as well. I don't want to become too engineering, and it's hard for me not to be. But yeah, so we look at that supply and then our flexibility. So again, we want to make sure that our systems can be online and available to our customers under situations where we do have a loss of a transformer or we do have other issues in the system as well. So having that redundancy and capacity is important, and also consistency is what we have in terms of what we stock. So there's a balance there. Again, time of use rate is not going to drive reduction of our system, but it is going to help influence, hopefully, letting our customers know what the actual price of these marginal costs for energy, and then letting them see the benefit when they use power at a different time.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, ready for a motion?
I move the staff recommendation.
Second.
Great. All in favor? Aye. That passes unanimously. So you got unanimous UAC, unanimous here. I'll bet it's going to be unanimous.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Are we going to be recruited to be in the 10, or are we going to be exempt from being in the 10?
if you are interested in being in one of those initial groups, we'll certainly reach out to you.
I was already envisioning my behavioral changes. Yeah. Okay.
We would be high maintenance customers though. I don't think you want us.
No, actually, that would be great because, we want to make sure we're working out all the bugs. So yes, thank you.
Okay. All right, so that takes us to our second item, which is consideration of a recommendation to the council directing staff to use Prop 26 as the design principle for the gas cost of service analysis and work with the Utilities Advisory Commission to review of a recommended gas rate schedule effective January 2026.
So I'm not bringing a whole new team. So Elisa Belair and Carla Daly will provide the staff presentation and answer all the hard questions.
Okay, so back in May, we talked with you about the 2025 cost of service study. And at that time, the Finance Committee voted unanimously to have staff go back to the UAC and do a more detailed analysis and look at the principles and guidelines going into that cost of service analysis. And council also directed staff to go back to the UAC. And during that discussion with the Finance Committee back in May, staff mentioned that one of the parts of a standard cost of service study is to come and have a kickoff where we look at those guidelines and principles and think about what those principles should be for the upcoming study. And so this item really looks at the guidelines and principles. It's something that we went and discussed with the UAC in July, and the UAC made this recommendation that staff and UAC are bringing to you tonight to really rely on Proposition 26 to use that as our primary and guiding principle for the gas cost of service. This presentation is very short. I'm just going to run through 3 slides on this topic. Can we go to the next slide, please? So Proposition 26 is really something that requires the rates to be based on cost, and it does not go into addressing the other policy considerations that are out there. During the UAC meeting in July, the UAC recommended relying on Proposition 26 as the design principle, and the UAC recommended that to form a subcommittee of UAC members to work with the staff and the rate-making consultant to develop the 2026 gas cost of service study. And that subcommittee would provide regular report outs to the full UAC. Next slide, please. So this is the timeline that staff envisions using in order to try to reach the goal of having gas rates that are effective January 1st, 2026. So during the next couple of months, September and October, staff and the cost of service consultant would work with the UAC subcommittee to provide information and answer their questions and hear their guidance and suggestions. Then we would bring the gas cost of service study for 2026 to the UAC in November. The UAC would make a recommendation to the Finance Committee, and the Finance Committee would then review the study mid-November, during the second meeting in November, and make a recommendation to the City Council. The City Council would then review the study, the final gas cost of service study, in December, and that would leave us enough time to implement those rates effective January 1st, give or take a little bit of time, hopefully. Next slide, please. So with that, the recommendation is really for the Finance Committee to recommend that Council direct staff to follow the reasonable cost analysis that is required by Proposition 26 and to accept the tentative gas rate design schedule that I just went through. There are several alternatives that the Finance Committee could consider, both on the side of alternative design principles or alternative timelines. So to name a few, the alternative design principles, the Finance Committee could utilize the design principles that were proposed by staff to the UAC in July for both the gas and electric utilities, or just for the gas utility, or use the 2016 gas COSA principles that were adopted by the council at that time, or make any modifications to those design principles. In terms of the timeline, the Finance Committee could recommend a modified timeline. And we're just noting on the slide here that if there are some, really substantial amounts of changes to the dates or changes to the amount of analysis that needs to be done, there will be impacts to the cost and schedule to the city. So with that, I'd be happy to try to answer any questions. We also have, as you know, Amy Bartel, Assistant City Attorney, on the meeting.
Great.
Hello.
Should we go ahead? Oh, sorry. Amy's going to wait in. Thank you. Go right
Oh,
ahead.
hi. I just wanted to say hello in case you didn't know I was here. I'm over here beaming in from New York.
And
Thank you.
Chair,
So
I
I'll
think,
just remain quiet in case any questions pop up.
Okay, thanks.
thanks, Amy. Sorry, Kylie Nose, Assistant City Manager. I think just a little additional color for the committee, since the UAC had a fairly long discussion about this, to be honest, and really grappled with the idea of identifying specific principles. And, they went through the process of wordsmithing what those principles may be, and with a lot of, frankly, just dialogue about the trade-offs, working through it with Amy. Ultimately, that's why the UAC came out with the recommendation as they did of using Prop 26, and then using their body as a total to work through the particulars. Is, everything comes with, there's 7 of them, one person wants to wordsmith one thing, and at the level of specificity that it was getting, it was bordering on too specific, right? And so they basically came back to the guidance of, well, let's go back to the law, let's go back to Prop 26, and let's use that as our guiding principle. So I don't want to diminish the work that they did. They spent a lot of time on this and really grappled with the pros and cons. But ultimately, I think, staff can elaborate further, and Amy can help elaborate on some of the pros and cons. But I just wanted to make sure the committee was aware of kind of the consternation of the commissioners and then why they landed where they were.
Okay. Should we hear from the public first?
Yeah.
Great.
We have 2 public comments, one in person and one on Zoom. And our first public comment speaker is Hamilton H. Oh, go on over here. So you have 3 minutes. Yeah. So you have 3 minutes. Let me just go ahead.
Dear Finance Committee members, the staff report for today's meeting does not include the gas rate design guidelines that were adopted in 2016 unanimously by the Utility Advisory Commission and then unanimously by City Council on consent. The current UAC did not have the benefit of reviewing or even knowing of the existence of these 2016 design guidelines, and instead had before it a novel, different, and much more verbose and harder to parse set of proposed guidelines introduced by staff that it found lacking. The commission recommended not using these new ones introduced by staff in 2025. On the other hand, the 5 guidelines from 2016 are commendable in their simplicity and very applicable to the current situation. They address climate change, the needs of low-income residents, and fairness that in no way are present in Proposition 26. So rather than abandoning all that past work that our staff, UAC, and council did in 2016, we recommend, Jeff Lazinski and I, that we continue with those guidelines, updated with our 3 minor changes in red. And I'm now going to read those guidelines, which were also in the email that Jeff Lazinski and I sent to you on Sunday. Number 1, rates must be based on the reasonable cost to serve customers. This is the overriding principle for the cost of service analysis, COSA. All other rate design considerations are subsidiary to this basic principle. Number 2, For this cost of service study, and to the extent feasible, the revenue from volumetric energy charges should be maximized, and the revenue from fixed charges should be minimized to provide the maximum incentive for efficiency and electrification. Number 3, the COSA should involve a review of all existing rate schedules for applicability in the COSA. Number 4, the COSA should evaluate the impact of rate designs on and support the economics of electrification. Number 5, the impact of any proposed changes on low-income customers should be evaluated. And the one we added was number 6, minimize fixed cost shifts between customer classes and explain any changes. Please adopt the 2016 design guidelines with our minor modifications as input for the 2026 gas COSA. Thank you.
Our next person is Peter T. Peter, go ahead.
Okay. Moment. All right. My name is Peter Taskovich, and I live in Palo Alto, a longtime resident. Staff has listed as an option in their staff report to use the 2016 design guidelines for the cost of service analysis COSA. The many benefits of doing so include expediting the creation and approvals of the upcoming and future COSAs by establishing important criteria in advance. This will result in COSAs that better aligns with council policies, a quicker council approval process, and reduced consultant and staff effort and costs. The current concerns over the draft 2025 COSA could have been avoided had the above guidelines have been in place and followed. That would not be the case were we to only have the vague language of Proposition 26 to guide the process. As Hamilton Hitchens and Jeff Lisinski stated in their email to you, we propose that you use the 2016 design guidelines with minor modifications. Here are the 3 changes we recommend and why. We propose adding the word reasonable to the first guideline to align it better with the actual requirements of Proposition 26, which uses that word to describe the city's requirements. We propose adding and support to the 4th guideline to help our city meet our climate goals. And we propose adding a 6th guideline to help the upcoming and subsequent COSAs reflect the council's recent intent to avoid large discretionary shifts in charges from one class of customers to another. In summary, the staff, the UAC, and council actions from 2016 were excellent, and we will all benefit by preserving them and with the recommended minor updates for this and future COSAs. Thank you.
That concludes public comments.
Thank you. Julie, you want to go first?
Thank you. I want to start just by saying that I appreciate the UAC, and I know that in creating this subcommittee, they've dedicated commissioners who will dive deep into this topic, and I think that's a great approach, and they're going to parse the details and tease them out further with staff to bring a balanced and sound recommendation by January. I do want to ask our assistant general, what is your title, Ms. Bartel? Assistant City Attorney. If you can tell us what the legal risk landscape is at this juncture.
Hi.
Just to
Yeah,
shed
thanks for
further
reading my
light on
title.
what's being presented. Yeah.
Oh, are we good? Okay. So the legal landscape that we're working in right now has changed a bit since Prop 26 came on the scene in 2010. As everybody here in this room knows, Prop 26 doesn't say that much. Rates are supposed to reflect the reasonable cost of service. That's about it. So that's not much guidance for public agencies to go on when they're setting rates. So over time, how this stuff gets fleshed out is it gets litigated. And the results are basically determined on a case by case basis, which is super unpredictable. It's really difficult for public agencies to set rates in that kind of environment. There's not much we can do about that because the Constitution says what it says. And over time, since about 2015 or so, and more recently, there's been a few more cases that have come out. I've seen a dramatic kind of tightening up in how the courts in California are interpreting Prop 26, and they're kind of reading into the case law really strict standards about what kind of data they want utilities to be able to provide to support the cost-based rates, what you can and can't consider. Basically, they're drawing this line in the sand that says rates must reflect the reasonable cost to provide service, period, full stop. Policy guidelines are wonderful. We all like conservation, but that's not what's in the constitutional provisions that cover utility rates. So if those can fit in within a cost-based rate structure, fine. But the cases are starting to be kind of dramatically narrower in how the courts are interpreting 26 and not really in public agencies' favor.
Okay, thanks very much for that. That's it for me.
Yeah. I'd be interested in knowing staff's opinions about the 2016 guidelines. Do you think they're reasonable? Do you think that something's wrong with them?
We're including the edits proposed.
Just without the edits right now, just.
So there's several things in there that I think we talked about with the UAC that we're happy to provide in terms of analysis, like the impact on low-income customers, for example. That's very important, and we can analyze that along with all of the other information that we're proposing. We're of course happy to try as best as we can to show every step of the way, show our work, and explain as best we can all of the steps that we're taking. So we're happy to continue to try to do that and engage in good faith with the UAC members to try to get some guidance and advice as we try to approach that topic. In terms of the line edits that we heard about in the public comment, I don't think we have a department response to that right now. Could be wrong, but I think in general, we're happy to provide all of the information that council members, UAC members want, and we're working with a consultant and with our staff to try to provide that information in a coherent, clear, and transparent manner.
Okay. I mean,
Can we ask Amy Bartel to actually add some response to that as well, please? It was a good question.
So the question was, were the 2016 guidelines wrong, or are they still legit or valid?
are we still happy with them?
That
Are they some flaw that has developed over the years or become apparent over the years?
Yeah, it's not that they're wrong or flawed, and the problem is that the cases have evolved since 2016. So we've got cases that have come out more recently. Like, just to give kind of a granular example, there's a case out of San Diego and another one out of another Southern California water district. But the case law it doesn't much matter for this analysis if we're talking about water or gas. So we're just going to use that as an example. And these water districts got rate challenges, and there were documents and statements on the record where the public agency at issue had said, yep, our rates are cost compliant. They're compliant with Prop 26. And we really want the rates to incentivize conservation, and we want the rates to change behavior in the following ways and encourage different, policy goals. And the courts basically looked really unfavorably on that policy-based language and found that it was pretextual, that the Prop 26 compliant language was really just kind of lip service, and that cities weren't really following that. Instead, they were going for the policy considerations. So as the landscape gets more technical and more challenging for agencies that are trying to set utility rates, we already have a guideline that tells us what we're supposed to do with rates, which is slightly less detailed than we would like, but the language that we have, which is in Prop 26 and says they have to be based on reasonable costs, and that's all we have. So when we have cases that say conservation is fine, but you have to fit it within this rate structure, my thinking on this is why overcomplicate it and make it more difficult and add on additional requirements when legally it makes sense to just work with what we have in the Constitution.
But if I look at, for example, the 4 and 5 in the 2016, number 4 is talking about should evaluate the impact of rate designs on the economics of electrification. That to me, that's just evaluating it. It's not saying that we should tailor it. We're just saying we should evaluate it. And same with number 5, evaluate the impact of any proposed changes on low-income customers.
Yep.
So-
And those evaluations and those kind of considerations will probably be done as part of a cost study anyway. So it's not necessarily necessary to go through and spell those out, because a cost study is going to look at cost impacts and cost causation anyway.
Yeah, but to me, there's nothing but good to having those in there. I don't see any downside.
The downside is when they come back to get used against you, and when they get twisted a little bit by plaintiffs' counsel who says, no, the city doesn't really care about cost-based rates. What they really want to do is make sure that we penalize people for using too much, to give, a hypothetical example. And so if you have statements on the record that say, we want to incentivize conservation and we want to make people pay more, when they use over a certain amount of energy, it kind of presents a bit of a wedge issue for clever plaintiffs' attorneys to use against the cities that are really just trying to do, what the state legislature and other constituents would like to see the cities do. So I think it makes more sense to just stick with what we have in the Constitution and make sure that the rates are cost-based before any other considerations are done.
Yeah, the 2016 does say rates must be based on the cost to serve customers. And to me, that seems pretty clear.
Yeah, I mean, I worked on the 2016 rate design principles too, and we put that in there first because that is the overarching principle. The problem is what's come along since then is more recent California Court of Appeals cases where when they see statements and documents in the record that suggest additional goals, the courts have been deciding on their own that the city really favored those additional goals over the cost causation.
Okay. So my opinion is I think the 2016 is a good starting spot. I think they're adding reasonable to that reasonable cost as opposed to just cost. I think that's a good edit. And support economics of electrification makes me a little nervous because that's saying that they should be changing as opposed to evaluating, and then minimize the cost shifts between customers. I think that's a good thing. We get a lot of heat if things change, and these rates are somewhat arbitrary. And if you're flip-flopping between two sets of arbitrary rates, I think that's bad public policy. So I like that last edit, but I think it's a good starting spot. That's my opinion.
So just following up on that, I think there's interest in reviewing the 2016 guidelines to better understand exactly where those might be problematic, as well as these proposed edits that we actually received from Hamilton Hitchings and his colleagues. And so I'd just like to hear whether maybe it's Amy who would best do this. Do you have that set of recommendations in front of you, Amy? What we received from the public?
Yeah, I'm looking at it. Well, yeah, I
Okay.
looked at it and
Maybe
I
if we
heard the
go one
comments.
by one.
There is another thing.
And-
Before we do that, I did want to
Yeah.
say one other thing. None of the rates that the cities adopted have been arbitrary. The cost studies reflect staff and the rate making consultants' analysis of what are the customer usage patterns in place at the time and what are the forecasted capital needs, operational costs. that's how the rate study works. Things change over time and cost studies are updated and refined. And so those changes are reflected in the new rates. And the city's been increasing or changing their rates just about every year. So the cost studies are going to look different as time goes by, but they all reflect, the facts on the ground and the projections that staff is making.
Well, didn't we, one of the things that I think we discussed last time this came before us was that some of the principles that were being recommended had changed. Even the same consulting group, it was a different staff member who had led the charge on the recommendations. And it really just had a different point of view, as I recall.
I think that's a fair point, but I don't think that it was just a change in a point of view. I think, like Amy talked about, there are changes in case law that are happening as each year go by. And so the different mathematical calculations, to your point, of how you could slice the data to determine what is the, quote unquote, cost of service. I think the opinions of those and the defensibility of those are adjusting. And
that the date of that previous COSA was what?
2016.
The previous COSA?
I'm sorry, the 2020 COSA?
Yeah, 2020.
The 2020 COSA.
Yeah. So then it's a question of how much we've been informed by case law since 2020 that is really significant versus up to 2020. And so I'm open to just understanding that, but I did want to go through and look at these recommendations, the proposed edits to the 2016 guidelines in the context of more recent case law, and just hear Amy's feedback on those 6 guidelines that were recommended. They're just edits off of our 2016.
Right, I'm looking at the
What's
2016.
problematic?
Yeah, I'm looking at the 2016 guidelines. I see 5. Maybe I need to pull up the email that had
Yeah, the email
suggestions.
it'd be good if you could pull up the email from Hamilton Hitchings. That he hasn't read just a few edits that they proposed.
Just need to grab it. Okay. So yeah, the first one is rates being based on the reasonable cost. That's fine. It also goes without saying because that is Prop 26. So you don't really need it. The second one,
Let
you
me
want to
just
look
pause
at
there. But even though it's not needed because it is somewhat redundant with Prop 26, isn't it good to have it there just as, as we're looking at folks look at our record?
That's basically the staff recommendation is just use Prop 26. So that's a
Okay, but
restatement of that.
I'm looking
and
at
that's
these
fine.
recommendations and whether to include them.
Right. So the number 1 says rates must be based on the reasonable cost to provide service. That's fine. It's kind of, like I said, it's in Prop 26 and the city can state that, that's what it understands as the rule and that's the rule that we're going to be applying here. So that makes sense. There's no problem with that. The second one, volumetric charges maximizing and make sure the fixed charges minimized. That's more of a kind of a direction about a specific, how do we want to design the rates? That's going to be something that you want to have your cost of service rate making expert take a look at with staff and make sure, does this make sense? You want to have them look at different options and kind of look at the facts on the ground, like I mentioned before. So I don't know that you want to, I wouldn't advise taking an item like number 2 and carrying that forward, because it looks like we're kind of setting the direction based on how we want the charges to look rather than what the costs are that create those charges. So moving on to number 3, look at all the rate schedules. Of course, yeah, that's fine. I think that goes without saying, but if they want to say that, that's fine. Looking at rate designs that support economics of electrification. Yeah, I think that's an area where, again, we're looking like we're kind of directing things before we figured out what the costs are. Um, so I
Yeah,
wouldn't
and
go with that one.
well, let me
Go
ask.
ahead.
I'm not surprised by your response on that. If we wanted to try to thread the needle with our language, that still didn't undermine our case, is there language that we might be able to include here that maybe is more defensible? But
Really, I think statements like this are easily manipulated in a plaintiff's brief to look like the city was trying to rig the cost study and back into a rate structure that supports something else besides strictly cost-based rates. I've
so you're
seen
saying
statements
any
come up.
reference
I
at
wouldn't
all
do it.
to economics of electrification, there's no way for us to couch that that would not undermine our legal position?
I think it's risky. It's hard to say. It's unpredictable. If things are going to be challenged, how they're going to be challenged. But what I've seen in two very recent cases about rate challenges that public agencies tried to defend with pretty decent cost studies. The courts are going line by line on these studies, and they're going line by line through the record. They're having the cost of service rate making consultants take the stand and defend the work that they're doing, and they'll put them on the spot. In the court, saying things like, well, didn't the city tell you that we're supposed to make sure that we maintain X number of tiers? And the consultant says, yes, but we're also supposed to make things cost-based. These kind of statements, not to sound like a lawyer, but they can be used against you. And so if we stick to what we know, which was that rates have to be cost-based, that's a position that I think involves the least amount of legal risk.
Okay. And then number 5?
Oh, number 5. Okay, look at low income customers. Yeah, I mean, again, low income customers already have some considerations built into California statutes, where we've got some provisions in the government code that say that the city can spend a certain amount of ratepayer funds on weatherization programs or any kind of energy efficiency programs, including low income programs. So there is a non there is a provision to kind of get you there already in the law. So I think that's another one that kind of goes without saying. Because again, let's come back to the purpose of the cost study is to look at what are the utilities cost to provide service. And this provision number 5 is looking at what impact that has on one particular customer. It's looking at it from the opposite position. The cost of service study, as cold as this may sound, is really just supposed to look at the utilities cost to provide service.
And so I hear you that in one sense, it's implied in the other state law. Does it place jeopardy on us to include it?
I would not include it because it's already in the law. I can't really predict with full certainty if
I'm not asking for certainty. I'm asking whether, in your opinion, it increases our jeopardy to include it, not whether it's already in the law. I heard that.
Yeah, I mean, it's really hard
Amy,
to
what
say.
if we
If I had to just go ahead.
Sorry, Amy. What if, to your point, if we were to include something like item 5, but clarify should be evaluated in alignment with California, whatever the references to the law that you're talking about, and kind of
you could
just
do that.
reference back to in alignment with California.
You could, and
Constitutionally.
the electric rate study does the provision that talks about some of the statutory requirements on electric rates, not to go talk about another kind of rate, but it has a parallel here. The study does mention, government code 365 or 385 does require that we spend funds on certain programs, and it lists them. So that is kind of a definition of what does it mean to provide service. So the cost study will evaluate that, whether or not this design principle says it this way.
Agreed. And then if we amend it to include that reference, would it make it less detrimental to include it? It may be redundant to include it, but even
Right.
though it is redundant,
Yeah.
because we're citing back to the law as our guiding principle, would that aid in?
Yeah, I think that would be one way to kind of try and walk both lines on this.
Great.
Well, that's what we're trying to do, and that's why I'm trying to quiz you on how we can strike the balance that we're seeking, and not just readily what to exclude because it might be problematic or it might be implicit, but we're actually wanting to have these be as meaningful as we can to reflect our objectives. So that's good to hear that. And then the last one they had added was to minimize fixed cost shifts between customer classes and explain any changes. So looking for whether anything along those lines is acceptable, and if so, what would be preferred language?
The cost study is not, the city should have refrained from trying to direct how the customer classes are going to be, how the rates are going to be designed at the start. What you want to do at the start is direct the cost of service consultant to look at all the city's cost inputs and look at all the data and offer some rates that would be cost compliant. Number 6 reverses that and puts the cart before the horse, and I would not include it.
Okay, thanks. So we've kind of gotten that feedback on the 2016 guidelines. We have what was the UAC recommendation to council. From a process standpoint, if we wanted the UAC to take another look at this, and there was an assertion in the letter that the UAC didn't receive the 2016 guidelines, is that correct?
The 2016 guidelines were cited in the staff report for the UAC members.
Okay, thank you. So if we wanted them to look at these kind of merging what they had proposed with the 2016 guidelines based on the feedback we just received from Amy, what would be the procedural steps to do that? Send it back to UAC, and is
I mean,
that?
ultimately, it would go from the committee to council to the UAC. So we're talking a pretty significant extension in time, technically. From what I'm hearing, and if you want to still make the January timeframe, because that is, ultimately for a number of reasons, the council's direction, we want to continue to uphold that. I might recommend the committee simply come up with the recommendation to council on what those principles are and let that guide UAC's work. And then it doesn't mean we have to go back to them. I will say the UAC took a very similar approach to what the committee is doing right now in navigating this and having this kind of discussion of walking the line. And, they went their route in terms of what they recommended, and the committee, it's your discretion. So I think you are following a similar pattern, and I think the UAC would be happy to follow whatever the guidelines are that the council provides.
So if we were to say direct staff to evaluate incorporating the 2016 guidelines 1, 3, and 5 with the added provision that 5 would have a statement consistent with relative passages of the state law, would that be fine for staff to take that and go to the council and come up with that themselves?
I mean, I think we would take that actually verbatim with some language cleanup. Is that it sounds like the committee's recommendation would be to take Prop 26 as the UAC recommended. I assume you are implying that you would use the UAC as that, let's roll up our sleeves and get into the weeds kind of body to help flush this out in the timeline that staff outlined.
You're saying it would go back to UAC?
Not this,
I'm sorry.
The analysis of like deep diving into the COSA study itself. and follow that timeline that we laid out for you. And that the committee's recommendation is the council give staff and the UAC the following guidance for their COSA evaluation, Prop 26, and then list out, I think, 1, 2, thank you, 1, 3, and 5 with that edit. And that would be sufficient. We
And I
can.
should have asked one clarification where it says in the staff report that the principles are those literally the Prop 26 principles verbatim, where it says design principles 1 through 4?
Lisa?
No, there are
Okay.
no design principles. Those were the principles that staff
So we're
proposed
just
to the
saying
UAC.
those came to us consistent with Prop 26, and that we may propose that these other 3 additional ones would be also consistent with 26. That would be our proposal based on what we just heard from Amy. And that we'd be asking staff to kind of merge the two. Is that right?
One comment, the fixed costs, how they did it in the previous study and how they did it in this most recent study, they had different approaches on how to break up these fixed costs. And volumetric is really easy. How many cubic feet did you buy? And but breaking up the fixed costs of the pipes in the ground, who's responsible for those pipes when those pipes serve so many different customers, that is somewhat arbitrary. And the previous analyst did one approach, this more recent one did a different approach. And that's what I'm talking about, flip-flopping, is that they changed their mind on how these fixed costs were applied, and that changed the rates. And unless that change was driven by court rulings, then I think then it's arbitrary.
Well, let's ask that clarification. Amy, did you hear Keith's question on that difference in the 2 COSA studies on those fixed costs and how they were allocated, and whether that change in the COSA study recommendation was based upon changes in case law, or was it more just the consultant's expert opinion?
Well, the thing that is somewhat freeing and also very challenging about Prop 26 is what I mentioned before, is that it's pretty spare on how you have to set rates. They have to be based on reasonable costs. The freeing part is that means there's lots of ways to do it. There's industry standard ways. There's ways that certain utilities do it who have lots of debt do it one way. Certain utilities that don't have any debt might use different ways. I mean, there's a lot of ways to do this. There is no one perfect way, because it really depends on what the system characteristics, the operational needs, the financial setup of the utility in question, what they're dealing with at that point in time. So the change that was made from 2020 to 2015 was probably based on the consultant and staff's analysis of the facts on the ground at that time. Was it the only way to do it? No, there were probably other ways to do it. But as long as the utility can support whatever way they choose with sufficient data, that's okay. There's no perfect way. And it didn't look arbitrary. It did, the cost study itself talked about why they made those decisions. But like I said, there's probably other ways that would also work.
Yeah, the proposed edit in number 6, I really like it. And can we have some coaching on that to say, because these fixed costs, there's not just one way to divide up when you have the pipes in the ground, who's responsible for paying for that, and how do you break up that cost? Saying, have some coaching to say this has to follow the law, and but we don't want to may have these arbitrary decisions, flip-flop rates.
And I'll just add that, we had the previous discussion on what was the methodology for the COSA, and then now we're having this discussion on the guiding principles. But a big bunch of the heartburn was how severe of a shift it went from one ratepayer class to another, in part because of a just difference in approach from one consultant with the same firm to another consultant with the same firm. Unless, I've heard that it could have been also because of staff input or whatever, but we haven't been told that in 2 meetings. So if that's the case, I'd be interested in hearing it. Julie?
Yeah, I just want to weigh in with a different perspective than my colleagues, I think. Ms. Bartel, I just want to get clear. You said you were a part of the drafting of the 2016 guidelines. Is that correct?
I was here back then. Yeah, I do. I have a vague recollection of working on those 10 years ago, 9 years ago. Yeah.
And they were brought forward in the staff report to the UAC? Is that correct,
They
staff?
were in a footnote.
They were referenced. Staff had come up with alternative design principles that are outlined in your finance committee staff report. So they were different from the 2016 that staff had proposed to the UAC.
And staff was moving away from the 2016 guidelines to a different set of guidelines in concert with the advice of legal counsel about the ways in which the courts have been interpreting Prop 26. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. So my struggle is I kind of feel like at a procedural level, the attorney made this, has given some advice. The UAC has noodled over it. They've decided to create a subcommittee to figure some stuff out. And here we are on finance with our own valid concerns. But I feel that I fear that this may not be the right role for us. I'm inclined to trust the UAC's guidance on this. We have our attorney telling us that California courts have been coming down on cities for appearing to favor a city's additional goals over the first goal, which is to adhere to Prop 26, the reasonable cost goal. So I'm concerned with the extent to which we might be coming up with an additional set of design guidelines here in our committee, or recommending that anybody come up with a set of guidelines in concert with what the members of the public have shared with us. I feel like it's going against the advice we're getting from our legal counsel and what the people entrusted to serve on the UAC have come up with.
Well, one, that's why I went point by point with Amy and only went with considering the guidelines that she thought were not problematic with Prop 26. So that issue presumably goes away. Second, we were told that the UAC had a footnote to the 2016 guidelines, but did they actually go through and were they deliberately looking at those? Or was that just something that was in the report and they might have glossed over or whatever? I don't know that process. And there's no allusion here in the staff report to whether they did or they did not specifically look at the 2016 guidelines and elect to go away from them for whatever reasons. And I don't know also whether they had the advantage of what we just went through here, which is going through those guidelines and seeing which of them are potentially problematic based on developments in case law and which are not. And I just don't know why, if we've just heard on the legal standpoint, which ones are not, and we're only considering the ones that are not, but ones that will help us have guidelines that are better aligned with what we're trying to achieve. I think that's the balance. Legal staff has one point of view and a technical point of view, perhaps from other staff, and we're trying to balance these different objectives. And there's not one point of view. If we only needed legal staff to write policy all the time for us, we wouldn't need the rest of us. But we value, and certainly everything that Amy just said was problematic, I axed out.
I guess all that I would add to that, Pat, is that here we are, we're spending an hour or so on this item, whereas the USAC has really mulled it.
Well, I don't know. That's the question. We don't know if they mold the 2016 guidelines. I keep asking that.
I hear you, and I don't
Well, you
think
keep
they
saying-
mold. No, I didn't mean the 2016. I mean the topic of what
Well, the
this should
topic
be.
one thing, but what we're having before us is what seems like a good question of which among the 2016 guidelines would we want to retain?
So I'm weighing in with more of a faith or trust that staff, in putting together the staff report with the guidelines from 2016 as only a footnote, have made an informed decision that the 2016 guidelines are really out of date based on what's happened in the courts since that time around interpreting Prop 26. So I am here on Finance Committee saying, I think between UAC and staff, there's greater discernment than I certainly can offer. I'm not, I can't speak for my colleagues and their backgrounds. They know far more about these things than I do. But as a matter of process and expediency, I am interested in saying, you know what, this is what the UAC recommended. I'd like to see us support that rather than try to fine tune this.
Well, you repeated this concern that somehow these incorporation of certain of the 2016 guidelines would be problematic legally, and I think we've asked that question and got it answered. And yet, so that's a good enough answer from me. The question I don't have, where once again we say, okay, we want to respect the work of the UAC subcommittee. If I was told, oh yeah, they looked hard at the 2016 guidelines and they made this decision, having considered that, that would also change my thinking. Yeah.
Just on that point, I just want to, my memory was that Chair Scharf had the 2016 guidelines printed out and was asking questions about it during the meeting. So I know that there was some discussion of it. Just wanted to offer that.
Okay, that's some additional information. We've been kind of trying to pry that out for some time now in this discussion.
That's helpful. Thank you.
So Chair, to your point, did the UAC take the 2016 guidelines and go point by point as this committee has? No, they didn't. But did the commissioners themselves at their leisure and preparation work look at them? I would say at least some of them did, yes, because they referenced them, to Lisa's point. So I think that's the hesitancy you're hearing from staff, is we don't want to speak on behalf of the full commission as we don't know what each of them individually prepped. What I'm hearing though is perhaps is a desire to thread the needle. And like I said, this committee is struggling with the exact same thing the UAC members did. And, edits like the ones proposed by members of the public were also brought forward by UAC commissioners, and they debated, do we include this, do we not include it, et cetera. And ultimately their decision was to just go back to Prop 26. That doesn't mean the committee can't choose a different policy call, and I appreciate the committee respecting the change in the legal landscape and all of the policy calls and trying to thread that needle. If I might provide a solution, what I think I heard from the committee members that legal and staff could agree to is 1, 3, and 5 from the 2016 principles. And those were referenced in the email as well as in the footnote. And then the 2 design principles that staff had proposed to the UAC that they chose not to bring forward that are not included in 1, 3, and 5. I think this is the reconciliation the chair was talking about, were design principles 3 and 4. 3 and 4 were about proper allocation of fixed and variable costs, and design principle 4 was about non-rate revenue sources that may be available for rate discounts. So if I might synthesize where this committee's gone, perhaps your recommendation to council is UAC is the body to work out the details with the following guidelines. Prop 26 is the overarching, with 1, 3, and 5 as amended based on what we talked about from 2016. Design principle 3 and 4 as outlined in the staff report from today. Everyone comes back for implementation by January. That's what I'm hearing, and that is what I'm hearing legal is okay with in terms of threading that needle. I will say I want to amplify Amy's voice that any guidelines, anything outside of Prop 26 poses a risk and can be twisted against us. And these are ones that we can take a measured risk associated with putting them on the record.
So one, I think we fully respect that we don't want to in any way jeopardize ourselves legally in terms of compliance with Prop 26. Kylie, I think you did a great job of capturing the direction. Can you provide that language to the clerk?
Sure.
Great. And do you need a minute to do that? Or were you all almost there?
Francesca.
Okay. while we're using up time, I'm just noting that the staff report gave us kind of 4 options. And the 4th bullet was modifications to any of the above.
Yes.
So I don't think we're violating our even the staff set of alternatives by modifying them. I think we're doing our job.
Yeah. The other thing I think is critical is that UAC recommended that we form a subcommittee. And I really think that's a really good thing.
They form a subcommittee?
We recommended that
UAC
form a subcommittee. Exactly.
Well, I don't know.
Yeah, I think all we need is for the committee to simply recommend that the UAC be the body. How the UAC chooses to organize themselves, I would leave that to them, partially because the more you regulate it, the more it becomes like a Brown Acted body.
Oh, I'm good either way. And with just referring this back to them,
Okay.
Based on what Kylie captured.
But they recommended to us that they form a subcommittee. And so I don't want them to interpret that we say, no, don't do that.
Okay.
I think the absence is fine. We'll make sure.
Okay, great. Another idle chatter that we can fill the time with.
We will clean up this language. Like I put in all caps in alignment with California law, just because I don't know the right citation.
Was I that
looks good to
forceful?
me.
Yes. Yeah, sorry, Amy.
Sorry. In alignment with the law. All caps. No. Yeah, I know the codes, but in the interest of time, I'll spare you my citations to the Public Utilities Code, but we'll make
Fantastic.
sure that they are considered in the study.
Okay, good. And Amy, this looks okay with you?
Yes, it does. I think it
Okay.
gets you there. Like, I think it threads the needle. I think it's not completely necessary, but it still aligns with Prop 26, which is what the city really needs to be doing.
Great.
I'd like to point out 2 minor things. The language in the top of the motion still says in lieu of adopting additional design principles. And so I think we need to remove some things there. And then the second thing is in our staff recommendation, we did also ask that the finance committee recommend the acceptance, the council accept the tentative gas rate design schedule. So I wanted to just bring that up if that's still something that the committee would support.
I think it's accounted for in the effective January 2026 clause. I will say though, where the cursor is, if you go to council work with the UAC, I think it's staff work with the UAC on a recommendation to the
Right.
council.
Right. And that recommendation would go directly to council, not back to the finance committee again. I'm okay with that. Oh, if maybe it's the
So we're
problem.
talking about the recommended final COSA and rates.
No, I'm talking about the after the UAC. This is going back to UAC.
No.
No.
This is going to council.
Okay, sorry, I misunderstood.
And our path would be, this goes to council, it's direction.
On consent?
Correct. Well, assuming it's a 3-0 vote, it would go to council on consent. Assuming no one pulls it, UAC keeps doing their work in whatever fashion they organize. They'll bring forward a recommendation that'll come to finance committee, and then it'll come to full council.
Sounds good.
All in time for a January implementation date. So we are moving quickly.
Okay, do I have a motion?
I move the motion that was on the screen.
I will second that. Okay, roll call.
Councilmember Rectal,
Yes.
Councilmember Lithcott Hayes,
Yes.
Chair Burt,
Yes.
motion passes.
Okay, thank you. And quick review of upcoming meetings. Thank you, everyone.
Hi, Chair and committee members. So in 2 weeks, on the 16th, we will be studying the CalPERS rates and the actuary report that was recently released, and then also be studying the connection fees for various utilities.
Okay, anybody else?
What are connection fees? Like new customers starting up, how much they get charged for? Okay.
All right, on that note, the meeting is adjourned.